Welcome to another episode of Speaking Through the Fog. My name is Miranda Largaspada. This is segment 6 of my chronic fatigue episodes. This is why I knew I couldn't fit it all into one. I even had to break up the last one into 2 segments. I thought it was going to be biological effects of chronic fatigue syndrome and the newest research and hypothesis into cause, but could not fit that all into one. So here we go with the biological effects they're finding. So last time I did talk about one. I had to talk about it to kind of talk about hypothesis into cause, which is the immune response that they're finding. They're finding that people who have the early stages of chronic fatigue have a really high immunity, so 3 or less years high immune response, and then the people who have 3 or more years have a supremely tired immune system, fatigued immune system, you would say, and this can creates a whole new level of problems, and that's why you find a lot of doctors saying they seem like the late stages of AIDS, and it's because they don't have an immune system anymore, so that would make sense. The other one that they found was, and this is really exciting, so horribly exciting, but exciting. So Stanford did scans on chronic fatigue syndrome sufferers' brains. And you're probably going, so what? I've gotten MRIs, I've gotten CAT scans, they've all come back fine, but they've used 3 different techniques, super high tech, and what they found was that so your brain is made out of gray matter and white matter. Gray matter is the part of your brain that does the processing and memory storage of information, and it secretes neurotransmitters, which then travel through the white matter, which is the long cable-like nerves in your brain, and they transmit the information from one gray matter to the other. So they found in general, in chronic fatigue syndrome sufferers' brains, the white matter has degenerated. And so that's why we have a lot of times, like me, I just stop because what I'm thinking isn't coming out with what I'm saying, or all of a sudden I can't remember something. And it's also why we can get overwhelmed by sensation, because it's coming in but it's not going anywhere. So the one they found most surprising is that a particular nerve that links your frontal lobe and your temporal lobe was the most affected. And your frontal lobe is your social reasoning center, your sexual desire, your communication, your speaking. It's where you process all of that. Whereas your temporal lobe is your auditory interpretation and your auditory maker. So that's why word problems are such a big issue with people with chronic fatigue syndrome. They also found a big effect. Well, and then on top of that, they found that the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe the gray matter was really built up. And that was like proof that what they were seeing was actually legitimate, because that's your brain's response to trying to get around the fact it doesn't have enough white matter. It's trying to process the information more so it gets through. So that's really exciting. And then they also found that that dang white matter isn't letting it come through. The pituitary gland and the hypothalamus are affected. And I was really excited when I read that, again, in a horrible way, because some of my symptoms, when I would look them up, they were directly related to the hypothalamus. I have temperature modulation problems. Sometimes I just get severely cold out of nowhere, and I'll even feel cold, or I'm always sweating and super hot. I run super hot in general, and that's hypothalamus. sleep problems is hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is actually really important because the pituitary gland and the endocrine system, their information is relayed to the brain through the hypothalamus. And also, the hypothalamus is very closely controlled to the medulla oblongata, which is what controls your autonomic responses. So if you ever failed an autonomic test like I did, it might be because there's nothing wrong with your autonomic system. It's your hypothalamus that's going wrong, and they kind of relate to each other. So this is good findings, and it's really putting forth that, you know, these symptoms that people have been describing for years now have a valid basis in the brain. They also have the CPET test, which again shows the exertional malaise, the immunity. Then they found the mitochondrial data that I was talking about last time, where it's not getting enough energy, and they got this through particular chemical compounds. I have to do a little bit more research into it, but they did actually find the scientific evidence behind the fact that the mitochondria in people with chronic fatigue syndrome are not absorbing energy correctly, which then would explain the CPET test, why people with chronic fatigue aren't able to recover as fastly, and it's because they're not, once they use their energy, it's the mitochondria take a while to get it back. And then the final, let's see, let me look at my notes again. Mitochondria. Okay. The final thing is actually not something found recently, but it was found in the early 2000s. I think it was in 2003. A Japanese institute actually found through certain chemicals, once again, that the brain was actually being inflamed, and it was swelling, and that it was an immune response by the body to some outside factor, and it was causing this swelling, which actually would explain the degeneration of white matter, because it is found if the brain remains swollen too long, the white matter degenerates. Now, I recently had somebody I was talking to asking, because I kept saying, to him, I was saying, yeah, oh, that darn white matter, it's such a problem. That's why, I can't talk, I can't speak, and all this stuff. And he asked me about, well, what happens when your white matter goes away? And not even with chronic fatigue, but it's generally, it used to be thought that once you lost brain cells, you can't get them back. Now, recently that's been found to be kind of a myth. It's not completely a myth, but the brain can grow brain cells again, and if not, it finds new connections and new pathways. So it might have to take the long way around, but it still works. So the only thing that's hard about chronic fatigue sufferers is it's hard for the brain to try to begin to heal when it's still inflamed and still being attacked. And it's hard for your body to focus on healing your brain when it's still trying to fight off whatever it thinks it's fighting off. So that kind of segments us into the last segment, which is treatment, because now that they're starting to get some of these theories put forward being proven, and they also now have the scientific data as to what's causing the symptoms because of the biological effects of the disease, they can start trying to work on treatments, and that's my last segment.